Hi everyone, it's Erin from the Provincial Farmhouse. In today's video, I'm going to be creating a Christmas book box. For my project, I used this book box that I got from a craft website. I will link the information and the link to this product below. And I started off by using Paint Couture's Farmhouse linen. I'm going to be applying 2 coats of this over the entire outside of the box. I'm only going to be working on the outside of the book box today because this was quite an involved process, but I definitely plan on doing another video where I show how I ended up decorating the inside. When my paint was dry, I took out this Decoupage paper by AbStudios. This is number 2410. I loved the Christmas festive doorways, so I'm going to cut those in half, and I'm going to be using the design on the left-hand side today, and I'm going to trim off that excess paper from around the edges. I'm then going to be using Paint Couture's Decoupage Medium in Matte. I'm going to apply a generous amount over the section where my paper is going to go. I've got it positioned in the center, and then I'm going to go over the top of it with what product I have left on my brush to smooth it down. I'm then going to lift up the other side, and I'm going to apply some more of the medium, just repeating the same process. When that was dry, I took out my Portabello Road stamp by IOD, and I've created some little stamped wall lamps because I want to have some wall lamps on my design. So I have stamped them just with IOD's permanent black ink on plain paper. I've cut them out, and here I'm working out where I want them to go. I'm then going to be using my drill to make an indentation because I'm going to be making a hole in the wood of the book box. I'm actually going to be lighting my book box up, and we are starting with the light section. So I'm going to drill a hole, and I used the Portabello Road stamp because it was the perfect size and scale. It was the perfect style, and I had a bit of a guide as to where my holes should go. I then inked up that same lamp design, and I'm going to position that on each of the walls. I'm gently pressing down and applying pressure, but being careful not to move the stamp, and then I'm going to repeat the same process on the other side. When the ink was dry, I took out some of Paint Couture's Bronze Luxe Metallic, and I'm just dabbing that into the empty spaces, almost colouring in the stamped image. I'm not going to go over the top of the black. I'm just dabbing that on. I don't need it to be perfect full coverage, and I'm only going to be doing the bronze on the bottom and top sections and a little bit on the lines in between because obviously I'm envisioning that it's glass in those other sections. After repeating the same process on the other lamp, I then started dabbing some more of that bronze in the wreath to make it look like bronze baubles. I then took out Paint Couture's new Cardinal Red Luxe Metallic, and I'm going to be brushing that onto the areas like the bow on the wreath and some of the berries. I ended up adding it in most of the areas where you could see the red. I just really wanted a brighter red, and this Cardinal Red is the perfect holiday red for Christmas. So I just wanted to go in and add that, bring back a little bit of brightness to this design. I then took out Paint Couture's embossing medium, and I'm going to be using that over the top of this brick stencil. This is one of my favorites to use because the scale is perfect, and I'm just using a plastic spatula to run the embossing medium over the stencil to create a raised design. Now I'm not going for perfect here. I just want it to look like it's the bricks of the front of the house. I'm going to be layering molds over the top of it, so it really doesn't matter if I don't get this all perfect. I'm just going to continue to work my way around the image, applying this stencil until I have it everywhere I want. I'm not applying it right down the bottom, however. I do have a different idea for that section. While the embossing medium was still wet, I went in with a wet wipe and removed any that I had gotten on the rice paper design, making sure I'm not obscuring any of those beautiful details. And then I actually started dabbing on top of the embossing medium to give those bricks a little bit more texture, to sort of blur them a little bit as well. I don't need them to look perfect. I just want a hint of that brick design. So I just continued to do that, working my way around the outside there. And again, anytime I got any of that on the rice paper itself, I would be wiping that back. As I was drying the embossing medium and it started to form a bit of a crust, I just lightly pressed my fingers over the top to brush down the peaks. I then took out a mini Christmas garland mold and I'm just dusting that with cornstarch. Then I'm going to roll out some Das air dry clay and press it into the top garland design. You can find this mold on Amazon. I will try to link that in the description below. I've just taken the mold out. I'm going to be draping that over the top section of the door, and then I'm going to be casting one of each of the other side pieces to go either side of our other casting. Next, I cast 2 of the bows from the same mold. I'm going to be placing one of each of those bows in the sections where the garlands meet. I then dusted my IOD or Christmas tree mold with cornstarch. I'm going to be working with the garland sections of that mold. I'm working that air dry clay into the design. I am going to be adding these either side of the door down the bottom. I then also cast the garland from the opposite side and realized that I actually wanted to do a full casting of this, so I do end up doing partial castings to finish off the one that we've already done on the right hand side. They worked out being pretty much perfect for that bottom section. I did, however, cast a couple of the top pieces there just so they were the length and look that I wanted. I then cast the larger bell from this mold that I had in my stash. I will link it below, and I am going to be positioning this one up the top on that top garland. I then took out IOD's Conservatory Labels mold, and I am going to be casting that mold there in the bottom right hand corner, but I don't want it to look the way it is. I'm going to be adjusting it because I want it to be smaller and thinner. So I then took out my palette knife and I'm going to be cutting out the interior label. So I'm just running the palette knife along the outside edge there, and then I took out IOD's Merry and Bright stamp, and I'm using one of those designs that says Christmas, and I'm pressing that into my wet clay. It was the perfect size. Would have been great if I could have had it say Merry Christmas, but this still works. I glued everything down and in place, but for the bottom section, I did end up cutting away some of the garland down the bottom so that my Christmas label could sit flat. I let my clay dry for a few hours and then decided that I would come in and make some holes for me to add some more lights. Now, I needed to do this before my clay was dry because I was worried that I might accidentally crack the dried clay if I came in with a drill and just tried to drill straight through it. So I'm doing it before my clay is completely dry. I'm just using a hook that I have from my shop. It's one of my display hooks, and I'm just using the other end of it because it is the perfect size for my drill bit and for the Christmas lights. So I'm just going to work my way around, and you can see I'm sort of positioning the lights so I know how much space I have in between each one, and I know how many I can use. I also had to be mindful as I was doing this, however, that the holes were on the inside part of the book box and not going to peek through on the outside section. So I had to keep a few things in mind, but I really felt like this would be a beautiful effect. It's not something I've done before, but I'm definitely a bit obsessed with these little tiny battery operated lights. I then came in with my drill and I started drilling the holes for those lights. I let my clay dry overnight, and the next day I came in with Paint Couture's Van Dyke Brown Glaze. Now remember, I have sealed the rice paper, so I'm not worried about that. I'm using a mister to water that down, and I am going to be coming in with a wet wipe to wipe a lot of that back. This glaze is going to give our castings definition and depth, and it's definitely just something that I really like to do before I start coming in with colors. So I'm just working my way around, and then I'm going to use a wet wipe to wipe back a lot of it. Adding the glaze is also what's going to bring definition to our stamped clay design down the bottom. I then decided that I wanted to use some of Paint Couture's pitch black chalk paint and use that to disguise the gap between the paper and where the garland starts. So I'm just dabbing that on. You can see I'm also wiping some of it off on a wet wipe to sort of tone down the intensity of the paint. And I think that overall I was able to disguise that gap pretty well. When the glaze was dry, I came in with Paint Couture's Amazon Luxe Metallic. I'm going to start by applying it to the greenery down the bottom. I'm not going for full coverage. I'm still going to allow a lot of that Van Dyke Brown glaze to peek through, because remember, that's giving us the definition in those details. But I am going to work my way around and apply this beautiful Luxe Metallic over the top of both of the garlands down the bottom. Once I finished adding the Amazon to the bottom garlands, I then moved on to the top section, but I am trying to avoid the ribbons and the ornaments that are in that garland. I am going to be adding color to those, so I'm being careful not to get too much of that green in those sections. When that was dry, I took out Paint Couture's Cardinal Red again, and I'm going to be adding that to the very sweet bows that we put up in each of the corners. I'm going over the top of those on both sides, and I'm also going to be adding them to some of the baubles as well. I definitely stuck with a more sort of traditional Christmas theme. I am still going to bring in some snow because that is one of my favorite things to do, but I did try and stick with those more traditional colors. Now, if you're going to give this a try, obviously you could come in and add whatever colors suit your scheme at this point. So as you can see, I'm starting to add the red to some of the ornaments in the garland, and I'm just loving this beautiful cardinal red. It's just the perfect Christmas red. I then moved on to adding that cardinal red to the bow above the bells up the top there. On the ribbon that's weaving through the garland, I added Paint Couture's Bronze Luxe Metallic. I do end up coming in a little bit later and adding antique gold because I did feel like the bronze sort of blended in a little bit too much. It wasn't quite as vibrant and bright as I would have liked, but it is still one of my favorite colors to use. Again, at this point, you could pick whatever color you like to add to the ribbon section. You will notice that I often pick the book up and I sort of change angles. This is to make sure that I am getting to all of those different sections. I definitely have to think about all the different ways that this book could be viewed, whether it's on a coffee table or sitting on a shelf. So keep that in mind when you're applying paint to your projects. I then moved on to that bottom label, and I'm going to be adding the bronze around the outside border section. Next, I took out Paint Couture's Oyster Pearl Luxe Metallic, and I'm going to be using that on some of the ornaments that you see. I love this pop of metallic white. It's just really, really vibrant and beautiful. It's not really something that I've done before, but it's definitely a beautiful look, I think. So I continued to add that over the top of the ornaments in the garland, and there's also some up the top just behind the bow, so I'm going to go in and add some of that there as well. I then started adding a few little dots of that oyster pearl on the garlands below. I just tried to look for any areas that look like they could be ornaments, and I just sort of randomly scattered them. I felt like adding this to the garlands down the bottom would tie the top and the bottom sections together. Next, I added some of that Bronze Luxe Metallic to the bells up the top. When that was dry, I added a little stripe of the oyster pearl. Next, I took out Paint Couture's Crust Medium, and I'm going to be taking some of that out and putting it in a plastic container. And then I'm going to be using Oyster Pearl Luxe Metallic to tint that crust. Now I've already added a little bit of the Simply White chalk paint, but this is just going to give it a little bit more shine. And then I'm going to be applying that with a palette knife down the bottom there, and I'm just adding it in the sections where it looks like there is snow up against the door. If I inspire you to try any of the Paint Couture products used in today's video, I would really appreciate it if you would use my affiliate link. I will put it in the description and on the screen. I just get a little thank you from Paint Couture in return. While the crust medium was still wet, I took out Paint Couture's Sheer Frost German Glass Glitter, and I'm going to sprinkle that over the top. I then decided that I would come in with some of that Bronze Luxe Metallic and just go over the top of our imprinted letters, just so that they have a little bit more shine. Next, I wanted to add a hint of snow to the garland, so I'm just using a makeup sponge with a really small amount of Simply White on that, and I'm going to dab that on the garlands up the top and down the bottom. When that was dry, I turned my attention to the back. I'm going to be using this gift wrapping paper that I got from TK Maxx. I did show it in my Shop With Me video that I did recently. This was about $6 for a roll. I'm going to be using Paint Couture's Decoupage Medium in Matte. I'm applying a generous amount to the back section of the book. This is a porous surface, so I am being sure to use quite a lot of product. I'm then going to lay the wrapping paper over the top of the wet medium, and I'm going to gently press that down. Next, I took out some baking paper, laid that on top, and then I used my iron. I do have it on a very low heat setting because my medium is still wet. I'm just using that to activate it, speed up the drying process, and reduce wrinkles. I then took out my sandpaper. My paper is dry, so I'm using that on the edges, and then I'm tearing the excess paper off. Next, I got out my drill, and I'm going to remove the hinges from the sides. I probably should have done this before, and I do regret painting over the top of them, but I didn't know exactly where I was going with this project at the time. I'm then going to lay down a generous coat of the Decoupage Medium in Matte, and I'm going to position that same tartan paper over the top. Now I'm keeping the two sides together so I know that everything's going to line up properly. Then I'm going to repeat the same process as before, going over the top of the decoupage paper, baking paper in between, and that heat is helping the paper to stick down and be smooth. And then I'm just going to fold over that excess paper from the back. This is going to give us a bit more of a clean edge, and I'm going to go over the top of that with the iron as well. To separate the two sides, I'm using my craft knife and carefully going along the edges. Now, I did have a little bit of a tear. I was able to fix that by adding a little bit more of the paper, but I knew I was going to be adding some other things anyway, so I wasn't too worried. I sanded off the excess paper from each of the edges, and then once I had done that, I ended up putting the two sides back together. I did end up adding another coat of that Decoupage medium just to make sure everything was down and secure, and then I screwed the hinges back into place. I then sealed over the top of the paper with Paint Couture's Extreme Guard in Satin. When that was dry, I took out my Bronze Luxe Metallic, and I'm going to be applying 2 coats of this over the top of the hinges. When that was dry, I took out this beautiful holly design from IOD's new Tinsel transfer. This is a beautiful gilded design. I'm definitely making use of the grid lines that are provided to try and get this straight, and then I am going to start pressing down. Now, you do not need to press down as hard with these. I very lightly ran that transfer stick over the top. If I missed any areas, I just put it back down, but I'm really pressing very lightly and lifting that transfer to make sure that everything is releasing. I then cut out the lettering here, all is calm, all is bright. I thought that would look wonderful on the back cover, and I am loving how this gold is fitting with the tartan. I used it on a previous video on some blue tartan or plaid, and it just pairs so beautifully. So again, I'm pressing really lightly, lifting the transfer up. You don't want to press too hard because you will get some of that extra gold from the background coming through. I did have that happen a few times, but it wasn't too bad. I then took out my Crimson Velvet transfer by IOD. This is from their new release as well. They have these beautiful candle designs here that I am putting down in the bottom left hand corner. I then cut out some of the larger snowflake designs, and I'm going to be adding them on the back as well. I just sort of spread them out in a configuration that I liked the look of. And again, not pressing hard at all, lifting that transfer up as I go. Now I have got a sealed dry surface underneath these, so that definitely helped with the transfer adhering to. I then used Paint Couture's Extreme Guard in Satin again to seal in my transfers. It's definitely recommended that you use at least a satin or a gloss to seal over the top of the tinsel transfer so that you can maintain that beautiful shine. When that was dry, I used my craft knife again just to make some little cuts in the transfer so that the book box would open up properly. I also added a coat of the Extreme Guard in Satin over the front cover as well. At this point, I decided that I wanted to come in with Antique Gold Luxe Metallic and go over the top of the ribbon that's weaving through the garland up the top. As I said earlier, I didn't feel like it was quite vibrant enough. It wasn't bright enough, so adding this gold definitely helped finish it off. I also added some of the antique gold over the outside frame of the label down the bottom. When that was dry, I took out Paint Couture's Van Dyke Brown Glaze, and I'm going to be using that over the top of the section of the book box that's meant to be like the pages, and I'm also going over the top of the edges. And then I'm using a wet wipe to wipe back the excess. I want this to have an antiqued look, but I don't want it to be too dark. Once the glaze was dry, I took out a makeup sponge and I'm just dipping it in the antique gold and I'm dabbing that around the edges of the book box. I want it mainly concentrated, obviously, on the edges for just a little bit of shine, but I am liking how it is slightly going over the other parts, the other edges, especially on that tartan that we decoupage down. It is creating a nice soft gold border. With the outside of the book finished, it was time to add the tiny battery operated lights. I am pushing those little lights up through the holes that I made with my drill earlier on in the project, and just working my way around until I have all of them pressed through. As I said, I'm not going to be finishing the inside of the book just yet. That will be in another video because this was already quite a long video. I then took out my Gorilla Super Glue Gel and I'm just adding a little dab of glue under each of the lights to keep them in place. And here's a look at our Christmas book box. I love how this turned out. I have never done anything with those little tiny battery operated lights before, and I haven't actually decoupaged with wrapping paper before either, so I definitely had a lot of fun trying new things with this project. Let me know what you think of today's project in the comments. If you enjoyed today's video, I would really appreciate it if you would hit that like button, comment, and share it out. If you haven't already, I would love it if you would hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so that you don't miss out on any of our videos. You can find most of the products used today on our website, theprovincialfarmhouse.com.au. Thanks for watching.